Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
A hospital corridor. A greenish-tiled old man peered into my eyes. From the daylight lamp, long children's thoughts stretched out. The ceiling echoed in his temples. Jenna nervously fingered the bracelet on her arm. Walked back and forth along the corridor, adding the clatter of heels to the sunset of the lamps. She sat down, trying to calm down, then jumped up again. The doors of the operating room echoed with a rustle and a slight creak. A doctor stepped out of them. Jenna jumped up again, looking hopefully at the medic. "Doctor, please don't be silent." She folded her arms across her chest in a pleading gesture. "The odds are 50-50. What will get up from the wheelchair?" The doctor finally said, tightening the mask around her chin. Jenna sorrowfully sobs again. "You have to believe in the best. He is still young. He will recover," cheered the girl medic. And I wanted to believe in the best. Of course, Jenna was worried about her husband's health. But she was more concerned about the loss of the family's main income and the question of who would now provide for them. Jacob drove out of the hallway to meet his wife returning from work. Jenna was not in a good mood. Lately, this state had become a constant for her. She had to get up early, work, do household chores, and still take care of her invalid husband. "How was your day?" Jacob asked, taking the girl's bag from her. "Disgusting," abruptly threw Jenna, taking off her coat. Jacob left for the kitchen. He was quite briskly handling the stroller and could even boast some mobility, if it could be called that. The man moved the bag of groceries to the floor near the refrigerator and began to open the door. He could only put the groceries on the first shelf or the bottom of the door. Oh, and it would spill over here now. Jenna snatched the bottle of milk from him, which she had opened on the way out, slammed it down and closed it loosely. It wouldn't leak to the neighbors. "Why are you yelling?" Jacob looked at her. "Would someone wipe it up? Are you talking, Jenna?" She felt developed and irritated by her husband's helpfulness. He realized his limited functionality, so he tried not to inconvenience his wife. At first, Jacob was even ashamed, but later he accepted his condition and stopped suffering from remorse. "In a bag of ready-made cutlets from the cookhouse. Heat them up for yourself. Can you manage?" "I'm tired." Jenna pulled down her temples with her hands and went into the room. The couch echoed with a faint creak. The cat was rubbing his leg, begging for a tasty treat. Jenna sat like a porpoise, fictional, lethargic, and universal. This wasn't the life she'd envisioned when she married the handsome athlete Extreme Lego. And now he's deprived of his outlet and his livelihood. And she has to work for two, running all over town, showing beggars. The family's cheap apartments. Not so. Jenna planned to spend her youth. She didn't. The husband had been in the chair for 6 months. At first, they had lived on old savings, but those soon ran out. Jenna had delayed until the last moment to look for a job. She was scared, and her inner ego was against it. By the age of 25, the girl had no sensible experience. She worked part-time doing shoots for online clothing stores, ran a blog of a young stylist, although she had a good education in the hospitality business. Realtor. No longer had it passed her by since the early days. So, all useless people, incomprehensible payment, running around, a lot of calls, the need to persuade someone, ride on the ears. What was it that kept the girl in such a flying place? The charming director and owner of the agency. He appeared there rarely, but every time it was in the office, the morning began. The entire small number of female staff began to intensively tidy up, correct makeup, check the manicure. And this was done, as well as very young female students moonlighting in their spare time, and an elderly accountant. Jenna also fell under the influence of Michael's charms. And the more time passed, the wider the gap between her and Jacob became. Jenna stopped believing in the mythical prognosis of doctors, and counting on chance is a thankless business. But here he was, a living, handsome man. Even if it is not hers yet, but it is only a matter of time. Such thoughts swarmed daily in the girl's head. There was a constant struggle between duty, feelings, selfishness, and conscience, and that evening selfishness and inner whims won out. Jenna at some point realized that she did not care at all about the opinion of others, that she did not want to support an invalid husband until retirement and to cross out her whole life with it. She too deserves happiness, deserves the joy of being a girl, not a frontal horse on her neck cart. The decision came in a moment. Strangely, such a momentous turn was made on an ordinary couch in an ordinary city apartment on an ordinary March cerebral evening. "Are you going somewhere?" asked Jacob, watching his wife pack a pile of things into a bag. "Yes," Jenna nodded briefly. "We're going to your mom's." The dwarf even raised an eyebrow in surprise and smiled with the corner of his mouth. "What kind of nonsense is this? The daughter-in-law herself wants to go to her mother-in-law's house." The daughter-in-law was giving up to work for two. Jenna tossed Jacob's sneakers into the bag with an apt throw. The man fell silent, and Jenna just burst into tears. "I can't do this anymore, okay? I can't. I'm beautiful, I'm young, I want romance. I want a decent man by my side. I want care and affection, not to look after an invalid." "Jean, I'll get out of the wheelchair," Jacob interrupted her. "The doctors said there's a chance. Or maybe you won't. I'm sick of this." Jenna threw in her bag another couple of t-shirts and with a precise movement zipped up the zipper. "Are you staying at your mother's? We need to live apart for at least a few months. 6 months. I don't know." They were both silent. Jenna was getting behind the point being made. Jacob realized that he was being discarded as an unnecessary thing. Indeed, what good is such a helpless and useless husband? And aren't you afraid of hanging off the ground on that inflatable mattress? Fellow Kevin pushed, barely landing, Jacob in the shoulder. "Don't go into the forest to fear the wolves," the man grinned, laying the foam on the grass so that he could collect it without getting tangled in the slings. Jacob and Kevin have been taking tourists on extreme mountain tours to the Caucasus for 5 years. The guys had tried everything that could tickle nerves and make your body shake. Rafting, jump rope, quad biking, long-distance hiking, mountaineering. But most of all, Jacob was interested in paragliding. He spent almost the whole summer in the mountains. He flew, tried, learned, took bumps. He whacked his knees on landing. Once he dislocated his elbow, caught on a tree paraglider, and fell from a height of a couple of meters to the ground. The air of freedom and the charm of the mountains beckoned the stubborn guy, who flew where others were afraid, and stayed under the clouds for so long that his fingers began not to have from the cold. Jacob began to ride tourists when he himself was already convinced of his own skill. So the guys worked Kevin for the driver and organizer, Jacob for the coordinator and implementers of extreme entertainment. In 6 months, the guys earned so much that the other 6 months could not work at all. But they didn't. They simply changed the style of travel, and instead of a couple of plans, they went snowboarding and skiing with tourists. "Oh, Jacob, you are finishing your stuff. If you fall off that high, you're still picking bones." His mother, Adriana, nodded a couple of times. But the guy liked living like this. It's 100 times better than sitting in a stuffy office poking at buttons. Dangerous. So what? It's dangerous to sneeze in public these days. So what? Now I'm not going out. Of course not. You have a great education. Go to the bank, make a career. My mother wouldn't stop, and the children will go too. Will you go to the mountains? No wife, no kids either. Mom, why are you bothering again? Jacob sighed tiredly. Parent was in her repertoire. Talks about the dangers of paragliding and frivolous with the tourist business were repeated regularly, even if it brought decent money. With Jenna, Jacob met in a social network. He was bored on a winter evening. Guy scrolled through the newsfeed and came across the page Pretty Girls. Something about this brunette rather caught the young man's eye. Word of mouth. They went on a couple dates. The girl was impressed by Jacob's boldness and passion. He took her on several trips, even offered to take her paragliding, and that evening selfishness and inner whims won out. Jenna at some point realized that she did not care at all about the opinion of others, that she did not want to support an invalid husband until retirement, and to cross out her whole life with it. She too deserves happiness, deserves the joy of being a girl, not a frontal horse on her neck cart. The decision came in a moment. Strangely, such a momentous turn was made on an ordinary couch in an ordinary city apartment on an ordinary March cerebral evening. "Are you going somewhere?" asked Jacob, watching his wife pack a pile of things into a bag. "Yes," Jenna nodded briefly. "We're going to your mom's." The dwarf even raised an eyebrow in surprise and smiled with the corner of his mouth. "What kind of nonsense is this? The daughter-in-law herself wants to go to her mother-in-law's house." The daughter-in-law was giving up to work for two. Jenna tossed Jacob's sneakers into the bag with an apt throw. The man fell silent, and Jenna just burst into tears. "I can't do this anymore, okay? I can't. I'm beautiful, I'm young. I want romance. I want a decent man by my side. I want care and affection, not to look after an invalid." "Jean, I'll get out of the wheelchair," Jacob interrupted her. "The doctors said there's a chance. Or maybe you won't. I'm sick of this." Jenna threw in her bag another couple of t-shirts and with a precise movement zipped up the zipper. "Are you staying at your mother's? We need to live apart for at least a few months. 6 months. I don't know." They were both silent. Jenna was getting behind the point being made. Jacob realized that he was being discarded as an unnecessary thing. Indeed, what good is such a helpless and useless husband? And aren't you afraid of hanging off the ground on that inflatable mattress? Fellow Kevin pushed, barely landing, Jacob in the shoulder. "Don't go into the forest to fear the wolves," the man grinned, laying the foam on the grass so that he could collect it without getting tangled in the slings. Jacob and Kevin have been taking tourists on extreme mountain tours to the Caucasus for 5 years. The guys had tried everything that could tickle nerves and make your body shake. Rafting, jump rope, quad biking, long-distance hiking, mountaineering. But most of all, Jacob was interested in paragliding. He spent almost the whole summer in the mountains. He flew, tried, learned, took bumps. He wiped his knees on landing. Once he dislocated his elbow, caught on a tree paraglider, and fell from a height of a couple of meters to the ground. The air of freedom and the charm of the mountains beckoned the stubborn guy, who flew where others were afraid, and stayed under the clouds for so long that his fingers began not to have from the cold. Jacob began to ride tourists when he himself was already convinced of his own skill. So the guys worked Kevin for the driver and organizer, Jacob for the coordinator and implementers of extreme entertainment. In 6 months, the guys earned so much that the other 6 months could not work at all. But they didn't. They simply changed the style of travel, and instead of a couple of plans, they went snowboarding and skiing with tourists. "Oh, Jacob, you are finishing your stuff. If you fall off that high, you're still picking bones." His mother Adriana nodded a couple of times. But the guy liked living like this. It's 100 times better than sitting in a stuffy office poking at buttons. Dangerous. So what? It's dangerous to sneeze in public these days. So what? Now I'm not going out. Of course not. You have a great education. Go to the bank, make a career. My mother wouldn't stop, and the children will go too. Will you go to the mountains? No wife, no kids either. Mom, why are you bothering again? Jacob sighed tiredly. Parent was in her repertoire. Talks about the dangers of paragliding and frivolous with the tourist business were repeated regularly, even if it brought decent money. With Jenna, Jacob met in a social network. He was bored on a winter evening. Guy scrolled through the newsfeed and came across the page Pretty Girls. Something about this brunette rather caught the young man's eye. Word of mouth. They went on a couple dates. The girl was impressed by Jacob's boldness and passion. He took her on several trips, even offered to take her paragliding, but she said no. Everything spun quickly, and in less than 6 months he proposed to her. Jacob was not embarrassed that the chosen one is spoiled, somewhat capricious, ambitious. But she always waited at home, cooked delicious salads and breast, did not criticize his hobbies. At work, Jacob's spouse did not kick out. Let her do what she likes, he told his mother. I earn enough for 2, but always beautiful and fresh. Jenna was more than happy with this arrangement. She was already dreaming of a full-service travel agency, a house somewhere by the sea, a column in some fashion magazine. Life went on at its own pace. Jacob and his wife lived together for a year and a half. His mother gave them her 2-room apartment, and she bought a small house in a village outside the city with her savings and moved in. But on the condition that soon there would be grandchildren. Jacob joked. Jenna rolled her eyes. Children were not in her plans for the next 100 years. But Adriana didn't need to know that. Instead of children, Jenna suggested her husband get a Spitz. Jacob was not against it and promised that after the next tour they would go together. Breeder and choose a puppy. A happy Jenna stayed home in anticipation, and Jacob and Kevin took the hikers to the mountains. Jacob was warned by everyone that the good his passion for flying would not end. But fate had other plans. The return trip in the mountains came in rainy weather. In late August, Kevin drove a minibus with a group, extremely careful to slow down on the serpentine corners. Jacob dozed in the passenger seat in the front, tired from the busy program and the early rise. It all happened in a split second when a dashing local in his car spun out of the turn and into the oncoming traffic. Kevin, you steered sideways to avoid hitting him. The car rolled over on its side and hit the passenger side of a pole and a concrete barrier. Jacob squeezed barely in half between the roof and the dashboard. The other passengers sprinkled like peas in the cabin, but thankfully no one else was so seriously hurt. They suffered abrasions, bruises, bumps, and a couple of broken fingers. Kevin dislocated his arm and suffered a concussion. Substantial Jacob was pulled out by emergency workers only 40 minutes later. Even rescuers don't travel fast in the rain in the mountains. He was taken to the nearest hospital, but there was no one there to take on the complicated operation. The man was urgently sent home to the capital of the region. There he could be given at least a chance to get back on his feet. The operation was successful. Jacob recovered quickly, but below the waist he was paralyzed. Without words, it was clear that extreme sports were over for life. Extreme and the job he loved. The minivan was beyond recovery. The firm was wiped out, with no transportation and no chief instructor. Jenna howled when she realized her beautiful, comfortable doll life was over. Her attitude toward her husband changed almost immediately. Whereas before she had seen him as a heroic pillar of leadership, a lover of danger, now only a source of trouble. Jacob experienced the crisis of mobility deprivation for a long time. He became depressed. 10 times a day he reviewed photos from trips, pulled the edge of the paraglider out of his backpack. The one in his hands sighed as he stared at one point. The atmosphere in the apartment was dragging. The doctor prescribed Jacob a set of exercises that were supposed to have an effect in time. But the man, disgusted by his helplessness, could not start doing them for a long time. Jenna avoided talking about the accident and the cow. You do him with your nose to his flaw at first. But as the irritation and exertion grew, she sometimes snapped. Jacob's fighting spirit only his mother tried to raise. She urged to believe in the best and not to give up therapeutic gymnastics. Once in a while, Kevin came to visit, but it was still difficult for the boy to talk about what he himself had lost. Time passed gradually. The former paraglider finally heeded the doctor's insistence and began to do exercises sometimes. Just in time, Jenna was baking at work and had a breakdown. It was a frosty morning in the village. A bunch of rowan trees were covered with frost, as if earrings decorated the bulb bush. A flock of sparrows hopped about in it with a cheerful beat. Frost covered the ground. Jenna opened the gate and wheeled the stroller onto the narrow path to the porch. Adriana sprinted out the door in downy shawls. Together, the two women pulled the stroller into the hay. "Will you be visiting long, Jenna?" asked the mother-in-law, touching invisibly and the dregs of her son's jacket. "Jacob for a long time. And I will go back to the city. I have to work," answered Jenna briefly. Adriana had no sooner opened her mouth than her daughter-in-law said a crumpled goodbye, slammed the door, and sped back to the cab to catch the train. The women stared at their son in confusion. Jacob was blacker than a cloud. He'd lost his favorite job, his ability to walk, and now his personal life hung in the balance. A couple days later, Jenna arrived again. The man was hopeful when he heard the gate bang outside his window. But Jacob was not happy yet. "I've always wanted a dog." Jenna, without even saying hello, put a carrier on the floor with Magton's cat. The frightened cat collapsed, shrunk against the back wall, and scowled hoarsely. Jenna walked away, not even bothering to say goodbye to Magtopus. Jacob began to feel a little better. The intelligent animal quickly became accustomed to the new conditions. The cat often slept on the lap of the owner, when Jacob sat by the window in a stroller or on the street, breathing fresh air. Sometimes Martin would get out of his seat and jump up and down to catch sparrows in the snow or hunt for an unknown speck in the dry grass. Jacob liked to watch the pet. It calmed him and drove away both boredom and longing for adventure. 2 months passed. It was the end of March. During that time, Jenna never came back for him. At first, the man called and wrote to her himself, but as time went on, his wife stopped picking up the phone and responded to social media with one-word answers. Jacob realized that he had been disposed of cynically and completely nonchalantly. His mother shook her head and often scolded Jenna. Especially, she was concerned about the suspended state left by the son of the apartment. "Good girl," Adriana lamented. "Mushenko fixed on my neck. She's living in the city in someone else's palace. Jacob, filing for divorce, I'm telling you. And everything will get better. Stop it." The man waved away our tribute to his mother, but he himself believed in his own words less and less. Apathy and longing ate Jacob. He was tormented by his own idleness because he could not do most of the housework. Walks were rare. Pulling the stroller down a couple porched steps to the ground was difficult. Once again, as Adriana settled in to do this, an elderly neighbor, Frank, peered over the fence at her. "And Adriana, what are you going to say that you have him on your hands?" In righteous indignation shouted the old man simply. "Hello, Frank," replied the woman. "So how else would you help them to scratch your tongue?" The gate is open. The neighbor deftly, not at all senile, ran to the wheelchair and helped down the steps to the path to the gate. At the same time, he asked both Jacob and his mother about what had happened. The man scratched the back of his head, shifting his knitted cap to the side. "And it is not clear whether he will stand up or not," complained Adriana. "I'll get up," Jacob muttered, feeling terribly embarrassed that 2 elderly people have to deal with him. "I got it." Frank threw up a finger. "Tomorrow I'll come and adapt it for your wheelchair. Then you're a grandson." He turned to Jacob. "Can you drive up and down? You better get back on your feet, though." "Okay." Jacob smiled a little and sighed. "Frank is not like my grandfather. God rest his soul, lazy." Adriana exclaimed. "He only knew how to make holes in his socks." The company laughed involuntarily. The neighbor soon left, having previously inspected the porch, and Adriana rolled the stroller along the sidewalk to the store. Jenna opened her laptop, taking a seat on the soft couch after work. Without looking, she waved at a text message from her husband with another question. The woman was interested in something else. Today, Michael, the director of the agency, finally paid attention to her and invited her to have coffee together at lunch. It was not for nothing that Jenna wore short skirts and spent several hours every day in the morning at the mirror. The purposefulness with which Jenna moved towards the goal, in the director's opinion, was worthy of applause. The girl went with the chief to a coffee shop, and in every possible way made it clear that she did not mind to continue communication in a more informal setting. Michael caught the hint, and at the end of lunch invited the pretty employee to dinner at the restaurant at the end of the week. Jenna cheered. "His suit is clearly not from a local seamstress," Jenna muttered under her breath as she looked at pictures of her boss on social media. "And a decent watch and cufflinks." Her eyes burned with admiration, but more with herself. From the moment Jenna had put her husband in the care of her mother-in-law. A month had passed, and in that time she realized that she was not living so badly. Work was suddenly no longer stressful. Cooking and cleaning became a rare worry. There was enough money for herself and still had time to shoot for clothing catalogs. Sometimes on the mental horizon slipped thoughts of divorce, but so far Jenna them from the metal. It was necessary to prepare the ground for a run-up, so as not to sit soft place in a puddle. How calculating. Cunning woman, Jenna understood this and therefore did not rush, although Jacob could have been served at any moment. But she'd think of something. And not much believed Jenna that kind. Attached to her Jacob first will go to such a step. The pictures of the boss told Jenna what she wanted to know. Michael, in his 35 years, was the owner of a nice house in the suburbs, 2 cars, and clearly had a passion for business things, foreign tailoring. The girl leaned back contentedly on the back of the sofa, scrolling through in her head options for outfits for a future date. A sick husband and the overall fact of a legal marriage did not slow Jenna down one bit. She didn't, as they call it, give a damn. X day came. Michael came to pick her up in his automobile. Jenna, from the moment of her work in the agency, tried not to spread much about her personal life. She took off the ring right after she sent Jacob to the country. And so in the car, she was already flirting with her boss, who was 10 years older than her. The girl got what she wanted. In the morning, she woke up in the house of her lover. Michael brought her coffee and asked if the young lady wants to go to the skating rink. A couple days later, Jenna coquettishly agreed. Everything went according to plan. She told Mike what he wanted to hear, and he was slipping into an affair with his coworker. At work, they decided not to publicize the relationship, although it was difficult to hide something in the female staff. Soon the whole office was judging that the head had a young mistress. Jenna quietly laughed at the chicken's colleagues, but to reveal the secret was in no hurry. Michael was her target. The first day of April was too warm. It was as if the sun had reached the clear sky, and now it could make all the plants bloom in one day. There were even some sleepy flies in the air, stupefied by the sudden joy of plus 19 degrees. Fyodor Frank scratched his stubbled chin and took his visor, looking at the sun. Look how it's resolved. He nodded to Jacob. The man sat in his baby carriage on the path by the porch and kept route company with this neighbor while he remodeled the Bukovina into a sturdy, smooth slope. On Jacob's lap stomped Martin the cat. He Chally had paws Olympic at the owner. Now we'll put something here than there, and you'll ride like a racer, shouted an elderly neighbor, wielding a hammer. Yes, at least we do not violate traffic rules, smiled Jacob. He'd been a little more spirited lately. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was the fact that Jenna had practically abandoned him. Either way, clarity had come. Besides, Jacob had figured out a way to brighten up his hated idleness. He decided to write a book about his journey to the paragliding regimen. He found a blank notebook in his desk and began to jot down ideas. Jacob had never written any texts before, unless you counted the essays at school. However, his work went quite briskly. It was the abundant reading in the winter evenings. His mother had always favored books and had plenty of them at home. In the same winter evenings, he and his parents. Sometimes the two neighbors were in the kitchen, reading opposite each other, drinking herbal tea. At such moments, Jacob forgot that he was deprived of the ability to walk and became a little happier. Martin stretched his striped back, jumped to the ground, and hid behind the fence on some feline business. Done. Frank looked at the completed work and then turned to Jacob. Only son, try to drive in by yourself. Jacob, helping himself with his hands, began to carefully roll the stroller up the man-made of the ramp. A few minutes, and he with his vehicle without any help was already at the door to the house. Well, that's good, praised his neighbor. Grandpa came from the fence. Are you here? Let's go to lunch. I'm a schismatic boiled. Jacob turned his head at that ringing, like a crunch of thin ice on puddles. A voice from outside the wicket was waving its arms, a girl in a striped sweater. Her blonde curls were poking out from under her beret, and her bright blue eyes were visible even at a distance of a few meters. My granddaughter Lisa. Frank nodded imperceptibly. Jacob is in town for the weekend to study. At whom? The old one still didn't understand. Grandpa, come on, let's go. It's getting cold. All demanding, fuel foot. Guests behind the wicket. I'm coming, and why are you shouting? Good-naturedly waved her neighbor. I'll go. Adriana, say hello. See you again. The bolt under the roof is bad. It could do with a new one. Frank gathered the tools in a bag, waved to Jacob, and went out the gate to his granddaughter. The man thanked his neighbor for his hard work and suddenly realized that he couldn't stop thinking about Lisa, even though he hadn't even met her. April continued to bring warmth and wind. Rare gray-white piles of snow remained on the flower beds, and among them sprouts of the first spring flowers were sticking out of the ground. Jacob had not written Jenna for a long time, but was actively working on the book. The second notebook was already written. Carts, can you get to the store yourself? Have you run out of salt? My mother yelled from the kitchen, and I can't move. The pies will burn and the soup will run away. The way to the grocery store was simple, a straight asphalt path of 250 meters long, the entrance to the premises without steps and a path without potholes. I can do it, Jacob said. He hastily put on his jacket, checked the change in his pocket, and rolled towards the wicket. Happy that he could help at last. It's time to go for a walk, his mother looked out of the window. The tires of the stroller rustled quietly on the already dry asphalt. Jacob moved slowly, looking at the village. In the gray and dull winter, it was depressing. But when the sun came out, the carved old skates played at once. Benches lived on the roofs. In front of the yards looked colored tires in the future flower beds. Nimble sparrows dragged grain from the chickens' feeders with ringing cuttings. Somewhere sheep were sick. The noise gladdened the heart, heralding the coming warmth of people and animals. Jacob got to the store without problems, bought salt, and rolled back. Almost back to the house, he heard the pitiful familiar meows from the roof of the neighbors. The man looked up. There was Martin sitting on the roof. Jacob had seen from the window that the cat used to climb up there on scaffolding. The neighbors were repairing something in the attic, where consisted almost all winter. But the repair was over, the scaffolding was removed, so as not to wait for the flower in front of the windows. And poor Kodov was trapped. There was no tree nearby, no roof lower than a suitable fence to climb down. The unfortunate Martin climbed into the attic to the neighbors. The day before, fell asleep there, and in the morning they removed the scaffolding. And now frightened animals, seeing the owner, howled at the top of his voice. You're stuck, poor guy. How are we going to get you off? Here is a problem. Jacob looked questioningly at the pet. He tried knocking and calling the neighbors, but they weren't home. Apparently, his conscience did not allow him to call Jacob's mother. The feeling of helplessness and inferiority came again. The man looked hatefully at the stroller. If it weren't for her, he would have swung over the fence, climbed onto the roof by improvised means, and lowered the striped one to the ground. Poor thing. A familiar ringing voice snapped Jacob out of his musings. Frank's granddaughter was standing nearby, and once again she took to the roof. Yes, I wonder how to get it. Cautiously nodded Jacob. Well, you don't have much to think about, remarked Lisa. Well, we can't leave the mustache in the lurch. She put the bag with some food on her colleague's lap, rolled up the sleeves of her sweater, and without shyness, climbed right over the fence to the neighbors. The man only clapped his eyes in amazement. The vivacious girl aroused in him a feeling of real admiration. Lisa went around the house and found an old 3-step skirt by the barn. She shook the find happily, showing Jacob that the idea was there with 3. It turned out to be low enough to climb on the roof, but high enough to reach her hands to its edge and grab the cat's paw. The frightened Martin clutched at the girl's arm exhaustively and looked around with bulging eyes. When the animal was on the ground, Lisa put it directly into the hands of its owner through the hole between the fence bars, and then carefully carried it with the 3 coups to the spot and swung the fence just as deftly in the opposite direction. There was no trace of the sudden intrusion. You had us worried. She knelt down in front of Jacob and affectionately patted the cat's fur. Thank you. I don't know how I would have gotten it myself. Jacob handed the girl a bag of groceries. My name is Lisa, by the way, introduced herself. Obviously you wouldn't, or he would have waited for someone else. The hearty passerby exchanged. The man smiled slightly. It's a good thing you were the passerby. Lisa wrinkled his nose. Let's get on a first-name basis. Why are we like old people? I'm just uncomfortable. I'm probably 10 years older than you. Jacob was embarrassed. We look the same age, Lisa remarked. What's the point then? To be polite. That's right, Jacob agreed. He rolled forward a little and stopped at his gate. Let me give you a hand. Lisa reached for the handle to open the door so Jacob could drive through freely. She stepped carelessly and tripped over the curb ledge. The man's reaction was lightning fast. He lunged forward and picked Lisa up with his arms. "Well, I'm clumsy." She cleverly hid her embarrassment behind a laugh. "It happens to everyone. It's okay." Jacob played along. "Lisa, come to our house with Frank. We'll have tea." "Of course we will." Grandpa was just saying something about the roof. Lisa remembered and nodded in agreement. She waved goodbye and went on her way. Jacob was happy as a child for some reason. He rolled the stroller onto the porch, opened the door to the house, where a hungry Martin stepped in. It was only then that he realized what had happened a moment ago. For the first time since the accident, the man felt his legs weakly as he pitched forward. They recoiled with a slight tingling in his knees. Jenna stretched out in bed, rays of sunlight falling through the window. The hands on the clock showed around 10 o'clock. Michael wasn't around. He always left early. Apart from weekends, work was the most important lady in the life of the director of a real estate agency. Jenna was in no hurry to get to work. She was already thinking of quitting. She was annoyed that Mike didn't suggest it. After all, they were already in a relationship, and he could also allocate some money for her. When coworkers called with questions about being ready to show apartments to buyers, Jenna always found waving goodbye. Sick with fatigue, business, an urgent trip. If he didn't offer, she had to quit, Jenna decided, waiting for the machine to make coffee. She liked it much better at Mike's house than at her husband's apartment. Quiet, spacious, and every little thing is taken care of by a robot vacuum cleaner. Dishes are washed by a machine, and everything else is automated to the max. It's also perfectly clean. Once a week, Michael ordered a total house cleaning from a cleaning company. He couldn't stand dirt and piles of junk, and he also preferred dry cleaning, where all the things were given to the hanger. They're already perfectly laid out. Unlike Jacob, he was always on parade, not lugging around all sorts of places with tourists, looking after himself. All of which Jenna clung to. That's how she'd always wanted to live. That was the level she aspired to. She had already realized the first part of the plan by becoming the boss's mistress. The next part was to gradually accustom him to herself, in his personal space. Jenna was already looking predatorily at Michael's second car, figuring out whether she needed a fur coat for the next season and when it was better to take a vacation. And there, when everything will be already grabbed, she will quietly divorce Jacob. The girl's plans were Napoleonic. At work, began to suspect a connection with the boss. When Michael gave her a ride a couple of times. On questions, Jenna did not answer, but only joked and rolled his eyes. When it all comes out, she won't care. In the meantime, it was better to keep the affair a secret. At least not to be jinxed, that's for sure. Jenna had a leisurely breakfast, took a shower, put on her makeup, hailed a cab, and went to leave in full dress. She was sure it would encourage Michael to take more decisive action. Like offering to move in with him at last. To work, like a holiday. The managers greeted, raising an eyebrow in mild amazement. Not to work anymore, Jenna informed her, placing the application form in front of her. So you're going freelance, or you've already found a better place. The manager put the application in a folder. You could say that, Jenna smiled enigmatically. She didn't bother with the detentions at her former job, hastily picked up her things from her desk, dryly bade her coworkers farewell, and plodded on out the door. It was amazing the determination that woke up in Jenna at the prospect of a relationship with a wealthy man, and how she dreaded being left in poverty with an invalid husband. Jenna went home, dropped off her things from work. Then you called girlfriend Jenna, and they went shopping together. Enterprising girl decided that a new set of beautiful lingerie will soften the news of her dismissal for Michael. In the evening, Jenna met her lover in parade at his house and informed about her decision. The man was not naively surprised. She had quit. But why? You didn't seem to be busy, and you were always paid on time. Why, Mike? Jenna coquettishly sat on his lap to spend more time with you. After all, a beautiful, satisfied woman, it's better for a tired woman to promise that yes. Well, what makes you think you were? Michael was genuinely perplexed. I felt that way. Jenna didn't like her lover's reaction. An awkward silence ensued. The first to break it was the man. I wanted to talk to you about the May holidays. I thought maybe we could go to the mountains, rent a remote cozy house. How's that sound? The word mountains almost made Jenna squirm. She was fed up with the mountains in her life with Jacob, and therefore, quickly catching her face, the girl with the most innocent voice began to dissuade Michael from his decision. Mike, in the mountains, maybe it's still cold. I want to get warm already, you know? She played with her eyebrows a little. Maybe we'll spend a little more and fly to a place where it's already warm enough. Lying on the beach is better than kicking mud in the woods. Don't you think? But we can do that. The man agreed and reached for his laptop to look for a suitable proposal. Jenna realized she had won. Jacob was waiting for a tea party with the neighbors for some important event. He was also very excited about the return of the weakness in his legs. Had he risen from the ashes of hope to fly again? At least to walk with his feet on the grass. Jacob longed for the paragliding, the mountains of his active life. He had buried it all when he got into the baby carriage. But now there was a glimpse of a chance in the darkness that not all was lost. The man found a folder with the doctor's prescriptions, studied the instructions on therapeutic physical training, and began to exercise slowly. Adriana even let out a quiet tear of joy as she watched her son practicing. She tried to support him in everything, but not to push or nag him. She understood what Jacob had to go through physically and mentally, and that's why she fell behind with questions about Jenna, about motivation, about the apartment. Time will come on its own. Everything will work out as it needs to. The woman sometimes told herself in the evenings 100 nodding visual spokes to each other. At a warm 12 o'clock, mid-April, on the doorstep of the house appeared Frank with Lisa Vida. The hostess was to invite them into the house, but the brisk grandfather waved them away and said that first work, then and race. So he inspected the edge of the roof and got down to business. Adriana fussed around at first, but then waved goodbye and went away to crack the dumplings. Jacob, Vita's tears settled on the front porch area in case a kind neighbor needed to lend tools. "That's a cool grandpa you have," whispered Jacob in the ear of the girl. "I don't remember my grandfathers. I was little when they were gone. I guess I was lucky." Lisa nodded and smiled as she looked at her relative, diligently tapping his hammer. "And yes, you're right, my grandpa is a good man. An example for the whole family. In hard work and optimism it is noticeable," agreed Jacob. "Do you look like him?" Lisa slyly tilted her head and looked down at Jacob. She rested her hand on the wheel of the stroller. What was her wait-and-see attitude? She looked at the guy. Jacob looked embarrassed for some reason. Her heart was pounding like crazy. This simple and perky student evoked in him a feeling similar to the first flight under the dome of a paraglider. "You are light, witty, and kind," Jacob said in one breath. Lisa as if experienced all the words in turn, and then nodded affirmatively, slightly pictorially, for some reason playfully patted Jacob on the shoulder and laughed. An hour later, vanilla and cherries wafted from the open kitchen window. Adriana, peeking out of the door, called out to everyone, "Yes, throw in that roof, Frank. And you guys, come and eat the dumplings while they're hot." Jacob and Lisa were chatting on a bench near the porch and didn't even hear the hostess' response at once. "What do you want, Adriana, to fill your stomach?" "Maybe people are in the middle of work," replied the elderly neighbor, wielding the flat options. "Grandpa, don't grumble. Let's go. It'll get cold." Lisa gently scolded him. She grabbed the handles of the stroller with Jacob and boldly rolled it down the porch to the entrance. He protested. "Why don't you do it? I'll do it myself. Let me take care of you already." Lisa chucked but did not stop. When the two of them moved to wash their hands in the back of the house, Adriana slowed down late for the youth, Frank, at the threshold and whispered, "There's a flower blooming." "I don't see it," he muttered good-naturedly in reply. "Do you take me for an old fool?" The neighbors smiled understandingly. When the whole company gathered around the table, the plates were already steaming with freshly boiled homemade dumplings with garden cherries, strong tea, and sour cream. So thick that you could stand a spoon in it. A martin was burning under the table. The cat poked its nose on one lap and then the other, asking for treats. Toward the end, Lisa quietly gave the mustachioed Striped and one dumpling. Martin instantly dragged the prey outside with a proud look. "Who is it that feeds the cat from the table?" Adriana was indignant. "Adriana, send them for a walk as punishment," winked Grandfather Frank. Lissa and Jacob looked at each other at the same time. That's right, the landlady played along. "The weather is nice. There's nothing to sit out. Go and pick a bunch of flowers." The goose meadow was already showing. I crossed, in short, the flag behind the village by the pond. A whole bed came out, and the road to Sokol just Jacob will pass. After the meal, Lissa and Jacob, sensing a trick but not seeing it, were outside the gate of the house and moved leisurely along the path. "Can't you walk at all?" Suddenly Lissa asked, and then she realized she was sorry. "I shouldn't have asked that. It's inappropriate." "It's okay," Jacob answered very calmly. "The doctors say there's a chance, but I can't do it at all yet." At the same time, he remembered the tingling in his knees. Recently, and his exercises began to do gymnastics to restore sensitivity. But sometimes apathy eats away, and you want to give up and accept everything, he shared with the girl. "They say that human possibilities are limitless, and it's all about desire." Lissa looked at the sun and then at Jacob. "And here I am studying to be a marketer, but I want to work with people en masse. I feel it, but I don't know in what way." "That's great," Jacob praised her. "In time, you will surely realize where the pole, and you will eventually get back on your feet." "I know that," Lissa smiled and discreetly touched the man's shoulder. Jacob felt the warmth of her hand even through the thick sweatshirt. It remained there, even when the hand itself was gone. They talked and talked about plans and tourists, about the shortcomings of student dormitories and evil teachers, about the countryside and the city, about the joys of life and far-fetched problems. For the first time in many months since the accident, Jacob felt alive. If his legs obeyed, he would have run, spreading his arms out to the sides and putting his face to the wind. The stroller hit a rock. Alexei threw as the wheel shuddered that Lissa had stopped. Did it hurt? No, he lifted his gaze full on her, perplexed for a secret joy. "I think I can feel my leg." It was from behind the rounded eyes and squatted down beside her. She grabbed her leg just above the knee and gave it a little squeeze. The skin recoiled Jacob, barely noticeable by an unpleasantly dull pain, as if through a pillow. Barely, but withdrawn. Jacob grabbed Lissa's hand. "I can feel her," he whispered. "I can feel her for sure." Lissa jumped up and laughed, then rushed to hug Jacob, a tear streaming down her cheek, either from joy or happiness, or maybe all at once. Jenna was dozing in a chair with headphones on. Michael was sitting next to her, looking at something on his laptop. Clouds flickered in the window, the plane carrying them home from their vacation. Jenna was content and mostly to herself. Abroad, she persuaded her lover to buy some expensive gifts. The arguments were ironclad. "I really need it, and it will be more expensive for us anyway." Michael bought, didn't argue, but he didn't have the joy of gift-giving on his face. Although Jenna was diligently broadcasting to the whole store, shining and kissing the man on the cheek. Mike himself never started a conversation about moving, despite the fact that the girl did not work, but occasionally hinted at the need to find a new source of income. Jenna sincerely did not understand these hints, although he pretended to be a fool. In the end, she moved her things to Mike's house and appeared in the apartment only occasionally. As the couple rested after the morning flight and drank coffee on the balcony, Jenna glanced again at Michael's second car. "I was thinking I might drive." "Where to?" Michael looked at her questioningly, carrying his gaze away from his phone screen and work correspondence. "To the store to run errands for fitness." Jenna began to curl her toes and then in heels. "So in sneakers or boots?" "It's more comfortable." Michael shrugged. "And it's easier than buying and registering a car." "Why buy a car when you already have one?" Jenna nodded shrewdly at the blue foreign car. Michael followed her gaze, wished with his lips, and after a pause said, "The car isn't running. I'm waiting on a new engine for it. Then I was planning to repair it, sell it, and invest the money in a project. And by the way, you don't even have driving experience." "Experience can be gained," Jenna said. "You can always sell it." I like her so much. I could be your sober driver after all. Jenna's nagging skills were first-rate. While still studying to be a translator, she'd realized that it was easier to ask for something than to make an effort and strain herself. And awkwardness can always be smoothed over later with feminine methods. So Michael irritably pressed the bridge of his nose with his fingers. "I don't drink, and if I do, I can call a cab. The car's not running, no one can drive it. When the right model engine comes along, I'll order it. But until then, you better buy yourself a pair of good sneakers." The man stood up, took the mug with the rest of the coffee, and went into the room, signaling that the subject was closed. Jenna hid resentfully. She found the recommendation offensive, considering that pretty shoes and stiletto boots had helped initially win her lover. She wasn't rejected directly, but rather harshly, by the way remembered patient, kind Jacob, who even though he could not give her a car, but never refused in other whims more modest. A few days passed. Jenna decided not to focus on Mike's refusal and try to talk about the car again. A little later, she pretended to be a diligent housewife, cooked a nice dinner, bought some good wine. The evening passed in a cozy atmosphere, until Mike suggested watching a new movie. The screen showed the serene life of a family with 2 children. The father was playing frisbee with his son. The mother was teaching her daughter to play the piano. A golden retriever snoozed on the mat. "I always wanted a big family too," Michael said suddenly, "to have a son and a daughter. I started this whole business so that the children would be well off and not need anything." Jenna, who was lying on his lap, was slightly shaken, but she did not show it. So here he is, the perfect image of a spouse for Michael, which he agrees to provide without question. An educated, working mom. Well, no, she's not going to be one, wasting her youthful beauty on children. When there are so many countries, so many cool options for leisure and self-improvement. "I feel sick." The girl jumped up and went into the kitchen, and suddenly it was already in her head. A terrific idea, and how to get all the benefits of a lover and not cheat on herself. She opened a bottle of mineral water, poured the falling liquid into a glass, and drank contentedly. The plan was simple and ingenious. Lissa only came to the village on weekends, because the rest of the time she had to attend classes. Jacob missed the girl, but tried to keep himself busy in her absence. He was especially reluctant to write a book and do leg exercises. Lissa supported his zeal in both endeavors. In the first 2 weeks of exercise, Jacob was able to wiggle his toes. In another week, he was able to tilt his foot slightly and tense his lower leg. With each new achievement of motivation, it was as if his strength for life was returning. May came, birds sang, tulips bloomed. The bushes and greenery had fresh foliage. Adriana bathed the flower beds loose, the ground cleaned up. Striking branches from a birch tree, there also bowed red, yellow, white buds of tulips. Next to them, crocuses crawled out in a row. At the very curb, blue caps of balloon buds. Martin was hanging around. The cat galloped, tail up, jumped on the brick walls, hunted for soldier beetles that flew out from under the slate. Jacob sat in the stroller by the porch and, covering his eyelids, basked in the sun. Suddenly, someone's hands were on his eyelids. What a thing to do, he stretched out. More playful than annoying. "Lissa, you thought I didn't recognize you." A giggle was heard, then chuckles. "Adriana, I've been sneaking around like a gorilla. I talked Aunt Veja out of it. What's he up to?" Lissa indignantly began tickling Jacob by the ribs. He immediately laughed, shaking off the remnants of his injury. Adriana laughed too, watching the children fool around. When the fun subsided, everyone went into the house to eat cold okroshka and drink jam, dried fruit. At the table, Jacob discreetly put his hand on Lisa's arm. When his mother was busy at the stove, putting on jam, Lisa looked at him embarrassed, but did not take her hand away. Instead, she stroked his little finger with her thumb. How this embarrassment did not take with her usual perky nature. Jacob himself felt like a teenager, as if he were back in college and timidly seeking first dates with cute classmates. Adriana saw what was going on at the table, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she remembered something urgent to do outside, grabbed her head, and rushed out of the kitchen. "Lisa, I have to talk to you." Jacob started when he realized that they were alone. The girl nodded and turned to him with her whole body on the stool. About what? About what's going on between us. Jacob sighed and took her hand again. I like you a lot. I realize that we're not just friends anymore. You become important to me, and you're helping me not to give up. I realize you don't need Kalenka, but I'm married anyway. Yes, she left me as a useless thing here. But officially, I'm still married. Instead of answering, Lisa hugged him tightly around the neck. Of course I need you for anything. And I'm sure you'll get out of that damn chair very soon, she whispered in his ear. Jacob's insides warmed. He hugged Lisa in return, at the same time feeling the distinct tingling in his knees again as he pulled her to him. You're an amazing person, with a good heart and a beautiful dream. Lisa looked into his eyes. And I care first and foremost about how you feel, not what the papers say. The man smiled and hugged the girl again. Let's get you back on your feet. Lisa kissed him on the cheek, and then everything will work itself out. Jenna got out of her seat and desperately ran to the restroom. At Michael's surprised look, they had just sat down to breakfast Saturday morning. They planned to drive to a business meeting and go for a walk afterward. Are you okay? Michael knocked excitedly on the bathroom door. Just dizzy all of a sudden from the nausea, Jenna answered, carefully imitating the appropriate sounds. She made some more noise with the drain of the cistern faucet by splashing water on her face and stepped out into the hallway. Michael looked at her with a mixture of joy and anticipation. Are you pregnant? He blurted out. Oh, I don't know. I'll take a test today. Jenna clutched her forehead. What was there to do? Michael picked her up, sat her down on the living room couch, began swiping at her with a folder. It's clear you're sick of food and your face is all bloomed. And if that's the case, you'll be glad you did. Jenna pulled the most naively righteous expression on her face that she could portray. Are you kidding? Of course I am. Michael knelt down in front of her. I've wanted kids for so long, and I applied for a second degree. What's to take back now? Jenna changed from righteousness to brokenness. Why take it back? You're a distance learner. I'm paying for your education, so you can work later when the baby grows up, Mike assured her. Yeah, so off to work she went. Of course, Jenna mentally braced herself again. Okay, I'll go to the doctor tomorrow and find out everything. She sighed, hugging the jubilant Mike. How to fake a pregnancy until the belly appeared. Jenna thought through the nausea, mood swings, dizziness, and bouts of appetite. Didn't seem to be a problem. A doctor she knew, for a fee, could write certificates of confinement for the first time. But then Jenna was going to stage a miscarriage. The only problem was how to divorce Jacob discreetly, but stay living in his apartment. After all, the ambitious woman had plans to marry Mike, but he thought that the apartment belongs to Jenna. He never let her move in with him, although he wouldn't kick his baby mama out on the street. Here was the puzzle, Jenna thought slyly. The certificate was soon obtained. Michael was jubilant, developed a flurry of activity, and was already choosing a name for the future child. He immediately moved his wife permanently to his place. In the evenings, he looked through strollers and cribs, endlessly discussed everything related to children. The girl nodded and herself tried to improve the moment to file for divorce. It remained to quietly finish the story with Jacob, so that it was possible to go to the registry office with Mike unhindered. There wasn't much time left, and every day counted. In the meantime, Jenna was taking full advantage of her position. She was capricious, demanding a personal masseur, demanding a stamp. But in a pickle in the middle of the night, she asked to buy that ring and that purse. Michael performed them all like silk, even made a separate bank card for Jenna. After all, the wishes of a mother and her child were a man's law. And as much as he liked Jenna, he liked her in spite of her temper. Are you sure? Lisa looked at Jacob very carefully. Maybe we should wait. I don't want anything to happen. Yes, I'm sure. Jacob leaned on the armrests of the chair with all his might. It's about time. We should try it. Both were in the living room of the house, on the carpet. Lisa stood next to the stroller, holding out her arms to the man. Jacob began to carefully stand up. At first on his elbows, his legs obeyed, but somehow inarticulate, in thirds with a force that was habitually healthy. Knees, bending as if presented by the weight of hinges, long since opened the door. Heavy. Lisa was eagerly following the boy. It's harder than learning to walk as a child. Jacob wanted to. He put one foot down on the floor first, felt the shaggy pile of the carpet, again like through a pillow, then put the other foot down. Had to make up his mind and let go of the armrests of the stroller. Doubt swamped the mind. Jacob closed his eyes and remembered his first paragliding flight. All around the clouds that affectionately hugged the slopes, overgrown with pine and fir trees. Jacob shook the long-forgotten sensations. He felt Lisa's support and tried to step. The leg was like a stranger's, stricken with a cramp, but nevertheless, slowly moved forward. The movement a step through the force, another step. The back remembered what it was like to be straight. Jacob scrutinized his legs, scarred from his many extreme activities, and it was as if he was reliving them all a second time, standing here on the soft carpet in his own home. The man was able to take a dozen feeble steps with Lisa's support and, tired, sat back in the chair. "You're doing an incredible job." The girl hugged him. "Let's go to the doctor. Let them record your progress. Maybe he'll make some recommendations to speed up the process." The idea is good, but how to get to the city and the hospital? Jacob nodded sadly at the still-needed wheelchair. "Grandpa has a car. He'll take you there." Lisa suggested. "No, you what?" Jacob waved his hands. "Frank has already done so much for me. I can't. My conscience won't allow it." "Oh, stop it." Lisa threw at him. "And that grandfather doesn't understand anything." "Yes, old stupid." Jacob was embarrassed. "But only if he agrees, don't insist." He grabbed the palm of Lisa, who was about to go to the grandfather. The old car evenly, body motored over the bumps of the rustic country road. Frank spun the steering wheel and talked about the years of dashing youth and work on the collective farm. Jacob sat on the back seat and held a folder with his documents. The stroller ran behind him in the trunk. Lisa was chortling in the front passenger seat listening to her grandfather's stories. It all happened simply, quickly, and completely easy. She asked for it, and off they went. Good thing at least Jacob had time to call the hospital and find out if the surgeon was seeing him today. "Well, my little dove, you know how to surprise," admired the Dr. Jacob after the examination. "At this rate, in 6 months you will be able to run." True, Lisa, who was also present in the office, could not refrain from asking. "Of course, this is the first time I have seen patients recover so quickly from such injuries. It's a miracle. Although in scientific circles it is not customary to say so." The doctor pointed expressively at Jacob's medical records, then at his feet. "Keep practicing. Develop the previous mobility in all parts of the leg. I recommend that you try walking with support." Jacob drove back almost elated. Confidence was growing in him, and he was sure that very soon he would be able not only to walk, but also to fly again. In such a mood, the man was caught by a sudden phone call. "Jacob, hello." Jenna's voice sounded in the receiver. "I won't be long. Can you talk? Hi. What's wrong?" A lump rose in my chest, and together with the living memories that almost ceased to bother me. "I filed for divorce," Jenna informed him briefly. "I guess there's no need to explain what and why. You're a big, smart boy. You'll figure it out." "Yes, I will," he confirmed his ex-wife's words. "Good. I hope it's done quickly. I'll be vacating the apartment in a couple weeks." While Jenna hung up the phone, Lisa heard the conversation. Unlike Glukov, your Frank. She turned to Jacob and whispered, "It's for the best. Don't be upset. You said yourself that she was just a formality. You're right, aren't you?" The man nodded. "Still, I loved that man once. The key word is once." Jenna fairly acted on the armrest of the chair with her fingers. Everything was going according to plan. Jacob had agreed to the divorce, even though he didn't have much of a choice. Michael adored her. The pregnancy legend was confirmed by a certificate. There's a personal bank card with enough money for whatever she wants at any time of day. Awesome. What more could one want? Jenna felt like a queen, in front of whom all those she managed to use in pursuit of the perfect life danced in formation. So that left the girl, staring wistfully at the ceiling, putting a cherry in her mouth from the platter on the table. Left with a car and an official marriage. She replied. Sama herself spit out the pit from the fruit. That's what we'll do today." In the evening, when Michael returned home, the first thing he did was to hug Jenna and stroke her stomach. The girl expected she fed her lover a delicious dinner, poured him wine, and gave him a massage. When Michael got angry, Jenna went on the attack. "Mike, I really want the baby to be born in a legal marriage. I grew up in a full family myself, and I find fatherlessness unacceptable." "I agree to that too." "Man, I wanted to discuss this issue too." Jenna waiting froze, like a hound who waits for the command to corner the bird for the master. Instead of answering, Michael reached into the pocket of his work case, pulled out a box, and placed it in Jenna's hands. "I wanted to make it pretty, but since we're talking, why not?" Michael pulled his mistress to him, kissed her forehead. "I'll do it." Jenna threw her arms around Michael. At the same time, they marveled at the size of the stone in the ring. They decided to get married in 3 months. By the time of the wedding, Jenna was already planning to get rid of her ex-husband. After the ceremony and banquet, it'll be a week before she fakes a miscarriage. The trap slammed shut in time and securely. "We'll have to eat a couple of pounds for the good life," smirked the girl, mentally continuing to listen to Michael's musings about the wedding. Surprisingly, he was almost not interested in Jenna's personal life. Before meeting him, she didn't even remember whether she had told him about the divorce proceedings or not. Apparently, nonsense like an ex-husband was so insignificant to Michael that he preferred not to spend any time or attention on it. Jenna realized it was a good time to push harder. "Mike, when the big belly grows, it will be hard for me to go to the hospital and generally go about my business." The girl put her head on her lover's chest. "Maybe you're thinking about a car. And so I would take a couple of lessons with an instructor to refresh my knowledge in my head. What do you say?" Of course, Jenna's lying. She didn't have anything to refresh her mind because she got her license through a long shot. And it's clear she didn't get it for free. The young lady was not afraid of the road or traffic police or other drivers. Prestige in the possession of his foreign car stuck. Eyes. Possible in your words, and there is a sense. Michael thought for a moment. He put his hands behind his head and set more on his forehead. Jenna held her breath and peered expectantly from under her lashes. Good. Finally, he announced his decision. Only we'll do things differently. I'll sell this car and buy you something more feminine, okay? Sure. Thanks, honey. Jenna let out a squeal of pleasure and started hugging Michael again. Hugging my lover. At the same time, I was thinking about getting a new watch or bracelet in honor of important events like marriage and a car. You should go into town and get that jerk stuff out of your apartment. You've been divorced for 2 weeks now, and you're still at it. Outside, the window smelled of lilacs. June was buzzing with young grass and summer rains. The sun was lavishing light on the earth. Mom, I don't feel confident enough to drive myself yet, Jacob answered, opening a jar of sour cream. Over the past month, the man has made noticeable progress in developing his legs. He could already stand up and sit down with support. He could walk slowly around the house with crutches, without support, walked along the wall, and tried to keep his back straight. Call Lisa, she's in town anyway. Every Monday will help you, the woman advised. Sits down opposite at the table. I don't feel comfortable. She's already here with me all the time, like a caregiver, Jacob mumbled. Adriana put her hand on his palm. Son, that girl loves you. Unlike the town mom, you didn't blow her off. Girls like that are worth their weight in gold. The boy looked at his mother in agreement. Jacob himself realized that between him and Lisa long ago everything and everyone understood. So why did he hesitate and wait for something? Maybe the notorious stroller still does not allow him to step forward, even mentally. A lot of people don't get it right the first time, but that doesn't mean you can't try again. His mother walked around the table, stroked the back of his head, and went out into the room. Jacob ate his soup, then pulled out his cell phone and dialed Lisa's number. Hi. I was wondering if you'd go into town with me any day soon and check out the apartment. The guy spoke, nervously twirling his spoon. For some reason, every interaction with Lisa gave him a pleasant shiver. Jacob was shy, lost, everything spilled out of his hands. Words were jumbled. He couldn't remember anything like that with any girlfriend. Did it mean what his mother had hinted at? Jacob didn't know. But every time he waited for Lisa from school, he got stronger, and the joy of the meeting was brighter and brighter. "Sure, let's go." The girl agreed. "Are you sure you can already without the stroller?" "I have to," Jacob assured her. "Good," Lisa's face warmed. "Voice then be ready Saturday." Very much looking forward to it, Jacob hit the cancel button. It was too soon, and he was so eager to add a whole one. But again, that childish indignation ruined everything. How surprised he would be to find out that Lisa was feeling the same way. Standing in the middle of the institute with the foam in her hand, "I allowed Walk to come with you," Lisa blurted out when they were already sitting on the train. Jacob revived in surprise. For the first time, he decided not to take a wheelchair with him and to do with crutches only. Why? Instead of answering, Lisa climbed under his arm and tucked her nose into his side so that Jacob could only see the top of her head. He smiled into the measured, sleepy emptiness of the carriage, closed his eyes, and hugged Lisa tighter. The apartment Jacob hadn't been in almost 6 months was echoed by the familiar turn of the key and the smell. The man breathed it in, standing on the threshold as if hesitant to enter. The smell reminded him again of the time of tourism and flying. There in the closet on the balcony in a case lies his paraglider, next to it in a backpacked equipment, tracker, boots, camera for shooting from height helmet. Jenna's stuff wasn't in the apartment. Contrary to Adriana's fears, she took every last jar. And judging by the footprints in the bathroom, it's recent. They didn't even bother to clean up. Jacob and Lisa ordered a snack from the delivery service and began to clean up. The man tried to do everything himself, but from time to time he still stopped and rested. Lisa quickly put the bathroom in order, washed dusty dishes in the closet, vacuumed the carpets, and wiped the mirrors. "You're doing a great job." She praised Jacob when they sat down in the evening on the living room sofa with sandwiches and cups of tea. "The doctor was right. You're getting better." "I'm too well motivated," Jacob joked, glancing at Lisa. She tossed and dropped the sausage in her lap. "I'm very grateful for everything you do for me." Jacob took a piece from his sandwich and transferred it to the girl's sandwich. "But the sky really beckons me. I want to fly again and do what I love. I just don't know how." Lisa Moraviova forehead. She knew what had happened to Jacob's partner and to their touring car. "Aren't you afraid of hurting your back again?" "Honestly, I'd go through the whole thing again." Jacob looked at her defiantly. "Why?" Lisa, perplexed, still bowed her head. "To get to know you again." Jacob leaned over, quickly pulled the girl to him and kissed her. Jenna diligently flew around the world to the cafe. At lunch with her friend, they had just toured a dozen bridal salons, looking for a dress for her and her bridesmaids. It was the end of August. All the wedding preparations were almost finished. A restaurant had been chosen, a photographer, a designer, a host hired. Defined the menu and sent invitations to guests. "Aren't you tired of belly-itching while sipping cold juice from a tube?" asked Jenna. "Tired? What can you do? It's a beautiful life. You want it." Jenna grinned. "Mike, you've got a tough guy. I'll give you that," dreamed the girlfriend. "Handsome, with money, established. He's got it all, not like your former test pilot." "You don't say," nodded Jenna, pushing her plate away. "A man in his 30s, and he's been hiking the mountains." "Well, they're divorced now. Forgotten like a bad dream." My girlfriends started laughing. "How far along are you?" Jenna nodded at her stomach and grinned. "The 5th month I'm eating like crazy. I've already gained 3 pounds. How can I lose it all?" "It's okay, 1 more week and you'll have a tragic drama," Jenna grinned. "Where do you get the paperwork for Mike to believe?" whispered Jenna. "My girlfriend makes them for me." Jenna replied in her tone. "I have to go to her today, by the way. Mike wants the ultrasound results. Paul wants to know the baby." She voiced again, laughed. "Genius you are, a woman," Jenka admired her friend. "I did not dare to do such a thing. If you want to live, know how to spin." Jenna shrugged her shoulders. The girls paid for lunch and said goodbye. Jenna sat behind the wheel of a brand new red sedan, and Jenna stayed behind to wait for a cab. Head. Jenna was already at the wedding ceremony, figuring out how her dress would sit on her and from what angle it would be better to take pictures. She ordered an exclusive bouquet of terry pale lilac roses from the florists and anticipated her image with him in such dreams. The girl pulled into the clinic's parking lot. A small documentary formalities. And Jenna was already sitting in the office of gynecologist Katya. A nice lunch was interrupted by a phone call. "Joy, where is it?" Michael greeted her on the phone. "I'm at my doctor's office. As soon as I'm free, I'll pick up my glasses and go straight home," harked Jenna. "Oh, great. I thought I'd make risotto. I asked if you could have it, because there's wine in the recipe." Michael asked anxiously. "Okay, I'll be sure to ask." For now, Jenna jabbed her finger at the screen and slipped her smartphone into her purse. Worried about my pregnancy. She hit her nose and made a quotation mark in the air with her fingers. "Well, what are you?" Katerina nodded at the memo to expectant mothers on the wall of the office. "Would get pregnant really already the right age?" "Yes, and the man you all have. As they say, would have hired a nanny, and you and the child, and the status. And you're not the boss." Jenna looked like she took a bite out of an unripe persimmon. "Are you kidding me? I'm already thinking about how I'm going to lose the whole thing. And if the potbelly did grow, it'd be stretch marks, swelling, and a C-section. God forbid. Maybe someday, but not now. It's up to you, but I would be worried about such prospects," grinned Katerina. "So there you needed an ultrasound at 16 weeks. I'll look it up. Who have I had recently with the same dates?" She sat down at the machine, then back at the computer, and began to look for suitable data. A couple of manipulations to change the date and last name. Soon the required documents were lying in front of Jenna. The girl gratefully slipped them into her bag, and to Katya moved an envelope. "At the wedding, decided already, what to go in?" she asked. "Yes, looked at a couple of options," the doctor replied. "Your own we are hot, on them and will spend." General laughter broke out in the office. Home Jenna drove home in a wonderful mood. She picked up the wedding glasses from the salon, carefully packed them in a box, and was pulling into the parking lot of Michael's house by 7:00 p.m. "That's odd. I thought he wanted to make risotto." Jenna turned up her nose, kicking off her shoes in the hallway. The house smelled ordinary instead of Italian. And it was too quiet, no sound of pots rattling or knives clattering from the kitchen. The girl went into the hall and saw Michael sitting in a chair. "You decided to order food from the restaurant?" Jenna tried to make a joke. Michael looked at her glumly. "Give me the car keys." "Why?" Jenna, perplexed, raised an eyebrow some more. Michael sucked in air with his nose, exhaled. "You give me the car keys now, then you go to the second floor, gather all your things, call a cab, and Katusha the hell out of my life." His voice boomed so loud it echoed in every corner of the house. Jenna cowardly squirmed, her eyes shielding her. She tried to open her mouth. "Mike, what's wrong?" The man stood up and roughly snatched her keys from her, shaved the coma off her shaking hands and handed her his. "Doctor, what do I care if she is stripped of her medical practice? Or better yet, sued?" Looking into his eyes, Michael said. Jenna collapsed on the carpet between the chairs. Reality rang in her ears, hailing down on her unprotected skin and burning her with the pain of red-hot needles. Michael squatted down beside her, took her chin, and turned her to face him. He'd like to get himself a warmer place at my expense. And with a mop they went out for not disconnecting the call. I, kak nudobno poluchulos, da takaya glupost. To think, Jenna burst into tears of shame. But Michael didn't care anymore. Jenna remembers that night like a blur. She had stuffed things into suitcases and bags in 15 minutes, not even trying to apologize, even though it was pointless. The offended director of the real estate agency made caustic jokes about her, and then he poured wine into his glass and drank in silence, watching the ex-lover frantically packing her belongings. Before he left, he took away all her expensive gifts of watches, jewelry, and brand-name clothes. Jenna walked out of the gate with exactly the same set of things she had come here with a few months ago. "Are you ready?" Lisa stood in front of Jacob and held his hands tightly. "Ready, my captain." The man mockingly put a hand to his helmeted head. In front of them a locker room or a takeoff pad for paragliding lawyers, and behind it a thunderclap made the fall mountain scenery incredibly beautiful. The slopes were drowned in all the colors of the solar palette from ochre to pogranitsa. Bushes of wild sea buckthorn, beads of miniature berries shone. The blackthorn did not argue with it, nor did the cherry leaf. Gray-brown stones, as if old wise men soothed the ride of autumn colors. It was the end of September. On the slope away from the site, the last emerald lizards basked and rare butterflies flitted about. When you walk to the landing, don't leave your feet abruptly. About the signal, we'll know it's time. The plan did not drag. At a gust admonished Jacob Kevin, correcting on that straps that grew somewhere only from behind the cradle. William, the instructor who had once trained Jacob, stuck out for the passenger. He won't be flying until next season. I'm in charge for now. All right, stay out of it. Kevin put his palms up and stepped away from the runway with Lisa. Let's go down the slope, and there I'm picked up, William Jacob commanded. But let's go. Jacob gripped the safety harness tighter and rushed forward. Lisa ducked as the foam was caught by the wind and began to rise upward, swaying weakly. Kevin put his palm to his forehead, shielding his eyes from the sun, and dashed his strength approvingly. And good, let's go. Worried about him all the same. Lisa nervously lost her fingers from each other. You drop it. Kevin patted her shoulder. William, we have the best of the best. We'll bring your beloved safely back to Earth. Lisa only glanced at the brightly colored paraglider dome, which had already risen even higher. Let's go to the lower one. They'll be landing there. Kevin urgently mentioned the girl on the airplane ramp. When are you going to fly? I'll wait until Jacob has fully recovered, the latter replied. He's the only one I trust. And anyway, it's so great and amazing and beautiful here. She spread her arms and breathed in the still warm, clean air, but with a hint of fall chill. Kevin laughed. You haven't been whitewater rafting with us or riding ATVs in the mud. There you can feel all the charms of wild tourism. I think that everything is still ahead of us, Lisa smiled back. Of course, we will definitely take you with us if you want. Work, and then we'll send one on tour with people. Kevin the funny man was laughing again. No, I'm only with my husband. Lisa shook her head. So for a lively conversation they reached the lower site, wherein the tents found a thermos with herbal tea and sandwiches. A lot had changed in Jacob and Lisa's lives over the past summer. They sold their apartment in the city and bought a smaller place away from the center. And the remaining money they took an old van in good condition. Kevin did not have to be persuaded for a long time. He was happy to return to the company and travel to the mountains again. He only asked for a good insurance policy in case of unforeseen circumstances. Lisa took over the information part of the company, handled advertising, answered the phone, and kept the documentation. Jacob was not yet able to fly as an instructor. He had not yet fully recovered from his injury, but he was happy to tell tourists about the coolest places to visit. Gave a copy of his autographed book to the most curious. But the biggest change was in Lisa and Jacob's relationship. It was now official. There was no lavish wedding, no expensive gifts, no typical dress. The young people signed, sat with their loved ones, and drove off to the mountains. That evening, by the time of the wedding, Jacob was walking with a cane and no longer needed crutches, much less a wheelchair. The doctors only applauded him and called it nothing short of a miracle. It's good to be here again and to be back to the old way. Kevin stretched noisily with a satisfied face. Almost the old way, Lisa corrected him. I'm sorry. Kevin made a changing gesture with his hand. Suddenly, Jacob's cell phone, which had remained in Kevin's pocket, caught the connection and played a familiar tune, announcing an incoming call. Kevin deftly retrieved the device and brought it to his ear. Yeah, no, that's not Jacob. What's he flying? Kevin winked at Lisa, who was interested, listening to this half-hearted dialogue. How does it fly? Yeah, like this. Already recovered, which I think is an irrelevant question. He's already married and loves her very much. While Kevin put the phone back away. Who was that? Lisa asked with curiosity. There is a star that has fallen. Kevin waved his hand indefinitely in the direction. Suddenly, he jumped up from his seat and shouted, Fly! Fly! Catch it! Lisa jumped up from her seat and rushed after Kevin. The two of them, with Valerie's help, brought Jacob safely back to solid ground. He was unhooked from the cradle, and the man was sprawled on the grass, spreading his arms and looking up at the autumn blue sky with sparse powders. Alive? Laughing, Lisa asked. More alive than ever before, Jacob blurted out, putting his hands behind his head.